There comes a point in many people's lives when the way they've always approached achievement simply stops working. For years, effort seemed intelligent. The harder you worked, the clearer life became. Discipline produced results. Persistence created momentum. You learned to trust that if you invested enough of yourself, life would eventually respond. Then something begins to change. More effort no longer creates more clarity. More discipline creates tension instead of stability. Pushing harder doesn't resolve uncertainty, it amplifies it. The natural response is to assume something is wrong with you. Perhaps you've lost your edge. Perhaps you need another strategy. Perhaps you simply haven't healed enough, understood enough, achieved enough, or awakened enough. So transformation becomes another project, another destination, another version of yourself you're trying to become. But what if the life you've been searching for has never been somewhere else? What if nothing essential has been missing? What if what has been obscuring it is not a lack of knowledge, effort, or spiritual progress, but the continual attempt to become someone other than who is already here? Many people arrive at the end of a journey expecting a final answer. Instead, they discover something much quieter. Nothing needed to be added, nothing needed to be earned. The struggle against reality simply begins to fall away. And in that quiet, what remains is not a new identity. It is the simple capacity to meet life as it is. The achievement mind rarely knows when its work is complete. It was built to solve problems, overcome obstacles, and improve conditions. For much of life, that was appropriate. Effort was intelligent. It brought clarity, direction, and growth. But the same intelligence that once served us can continue operating long after the conditions that required it have changed. Without realizing it, we begin applying the same strategy to ourselves. If I can just understand one more thing, if I can become a little more aligned, if I can finally remove my last limitation, then I can relax. Then life can begin. The destination always remains just beyond where we are. The search never quite ends, only the language changes. What once sounded like ambition may now sound like personal development. What once sounded like self-improvement may now sound like spiritual awakening. But underneath the different vocabulary, the movement is often the same. The self is still trying to secure certainty before allowing itself to fully participate in life. Over time, the nervous system becomes organized around reaching, always reaching for the next answer, the next insight, the next level, the next version of yourself. It becomes accustomed to living just ahead of the present moment, believing that fulfillment exists somewhere beyond what is already here. This reaching is rarely driven by greed or vanity. More often, it is an intelligent attempt to reduce uncertainty, to avoid mistakes, to protect against disappointment, to ensure that life unfolds according to plan. For years, this organization can feel entirely natural because it often produces results. It builds careers, it develops competence, it creates stability. But eventually, something begins to change. The same strategies that once created movement begin creating friction. The effort itself becomes heavy. Progress feels increasingly disconnected from peace. Not because the strategies were wrong, but because they continue operating beyond the conditions that made them accurate. What once sounded like an intelligent adaptation quietly becomes an identity. We no longer simply strive. We become the one who is always striving. We no longer simply improve. We become the one who is always becoming. Without the search, we may not know who we are. This is why letting go can feel so unsettling. It is not simply the loss of a habit. It can feel like the loss of ourselves. Yet what is actually ending is not your capacity to grow. It is the belief that you must become someone else before life can finally be lived. The search begins to soften, not because growth has ended, but because life no longer needs to be postponed until you arrive somewhere other than here. When the search begins to quiet, something else becomes visible. You begin to notice how deeply this pattern has shaped almost every area of your life. Achievement becomes a way of proving your worth. Relationships become something to get right. Health becomes another standard to meet. Money becomes evidence that you're succeeding. Purpose becomes another identity to construct. Even spirituality can become another form of achievement. Instead of asking, "What is life showing me?" we ask, "How am I doing?" Every experience becomes an evaluation. Am I making progress? Am I becoming who I'm supposed to become? Am I finally getting this right? Without realizing it, life becomes a continuous performance. Every success has to mean something. Every failure has to explain something. Every setback becomes personal. Every achievement becomes temporary because another one is already waiting. The self lives under constant measurement, but reality has never required this. Throughout this book, we have explored a different possibility. Reality is not asking you to defend an identity. It is not asking you to prove your value. It is not asking you to become worthy before participating. Reality simply continues responding. It offers feedback rather than judgment, correction rather than condemnation, information rather than verdicts. The more this becomes lived rather than merely understood, something begins to soften. The need to force certainty begins to relax. The need to control every outcome loses its urgency. The need to explain every experience begins to fade. This does not happen because life becomes easier. It happens because your relationship with life becomes more accurate. You no longer need every experience to confirm who you are. Experiences are allowed to be what they have always been: events, feedback, moments within an ongoing dialogue. This changes achievement in profound ways. You still create, you still build, you still make decisions, you still pursue meaningful work, but action no longer carries the burden of securing your identity. Desire continues to move you. Curiosity continues to expand you. Responsibility continues to call you forward. The difference is that these movements no longer arise from compensation. They arise from contact. Action becomes a response to what is actually happening, rather than an attempt to force reality into agreement with your expectations. Growth continues, learning continues, achievement continues, but they become expressions of coherence rather than attempts to become enough. From the outside, your life may appear much the same. You may still lead, create, work, love, serve, build. The external movement of life continues. Internally, however, something fundamental has changed. The struggle to become someone else begins to dissolve. You discover that peace was never found at the end of achievement. It appears when achievement no longer has to carry the weight of proving who you are. Life is no longer something to manage from a distance. It becomes something to meet, moment by moment, through direct and ongoing contact with reality. If there is one final shift this book invites, it is this. Perhaps alignment was never something you needed to create. Perhaps it was never something waiting for you at the end of enough healing, enough knowledge, or enough achievement. Perhaps alignment is simply what remains when the effort to impose yourself upon reality begins to dissolve. Throughout this journey, we have explored many ideas: the limits of control, the role of desire, the intelligence of intuition, the necessity of feedback, the dissolution of belief, the movement beyond intuition itself. But none of these were presented as truths to collect or identities to adopt. They were invitations to notice where life was already responding and where unnecessary effort was interrupting that response. Nothing needed to be added to who you are. Only the extra friction needed to fall away. As that friction dissolves, something remarkably ordinary begins to emerge. You become more available to this moment, not passive, not indifferent, not resigned, present, responsive, available. You stop trying to stand outside of life so that you can manage it. You find yourself standing within it. Life is no longer something happening to you, nor is it something you are attempting to conquer through greater effort or greater understanding. It becomes what it has always been, a living dialogue, each moment informing the next, each response refining your understanding, each experience offering another opportunity for deeper contact. You no longer need certainty before taking the next step. You no longer need guarantees before moving. Accuracy becomes enough. Responsiveness becomes enough. Participation becomes enough. There is no final state to maintain, no perfected version of yourself to protect, no permanent arrival to defend. Life continues to move. Reality continues to respond, and you continue to participate, not by controlling the dialogue, but by remaining in contact with it. Perhaps this is what achievement was pointing toward all along, not the accumulation of success, not the perfection of the self, but the quiet capacity to remain present as life continually unfolds. There is nowhere left to arrive, only the ongoing invitation to meet reality exactly as it is and allow the next moment to reveal itself through contact. As you come to the end of this book, you may notice something unexpected. There is nothing you need to hold on to. You do not need to remember every concept. You do not need another philosophy. You do not need another method. You do not need to become someone new. This book was never asking you to construct a better identity. It was inviting you to notice where life was already speaking and where effort had been quietly interrupting the conversation. So rather than asking yourself what you have learned, perhaps ask something much simpler. Where am I resisting what is already here? Where am I allowing reality to inform me instead of insisting that it agree with me? Where am I already in contact with life? You do not have to answer these questions intellectually. Simply notice. Notice where there is unnecessary tension. Notice where there is openness. Notice where life already feels responsive. Perhaps that quiet noticing is where everything begins. Not because your circumstances have suddenly changed, not because you have finally arrived, but because you are no longer standing outside your life trying to control it before you can enter it. The journey was never about becoming aligned. It was about discovering that alignment was never absent. It was simply hidden beneath the effort to become. What remains is not another belief to defend, not another identity to maintain, not another destination to reach. Only the quiet capacity to remain in contact, to listen, to respond, to be corrected, to participate. Life will continue to move. Reality will continue to respond, and you will continue to meet it, not perfectly, not finally, but directly. Because this was never the end of the journey. It is simply a pause in an ongoing dialogue. From here, there is nothing left to achieve in order to begin living. There is only life itself and your willingness to remain in contact with it.